This evening, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to look at the next condition, which I believe is number 8 in the prerequisites of prayer. And this has everything to do with facing the Qibla. It's the great Imam al-Buhuti rahimahullah ta'ala. He says, وَمِنْهَا اسْتِقْبَالُ الْقِبْلَةِ. So here, referring to وَمِنْهَا, meaning from them, the prerequisites of prayer also include facing the Qibla. Facing the Qibla. So the Qibla is called such, Qibla, if we're looking at it from a linguistic perspective, because it's the direction which people turn towards. And the turning towards is called iqbal, basically to face towards that particular direction. So it's called Qibla because of such. It's the condition in which they are facing in a certain direction. And the Qibla, of course, as we know, is the Kaaba, or the general direction of the Kaaba. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطَرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. Turn your face towards the sacred masjid. Surah Al-Baqarah, this is verse number 149. The Qibla was not and is not always the Kaaba. In the very beginning it was Bayt al-Maqdis at one point. The Prophet ﷺ prayed in that direction for 10 years while in Mecca, and then another 17 months while in Medina. The 17 months while in Medina was reported by Imam al-Nasa'i in his collection of hadith. One of the greats, al-Fakhr al-Razi, he related 3 different views in his tafsir. The Prophet's prayers while he was in Mecca. The first of those is that when he was in Mecca, alayhi salatu wasalam, he prayed toward the Kaaba, and when he migrated to Medina, he was ordered to pray toward Bayt al-Maqdis for 17 months. That's the first one. The second one, when he prayed, he would face Bayt al-Maqdis with the Kaaba in front of him and basically between him and Bayt al-Maqdis. So he was facing both, the Kaaba as well as Bayt al-Maqdis. The third, he said that he only prayed toward Bayt al-Maqdis while in Mecca and another 17 months in Medina until he was ordered to face Mecca. So there's some different views. What seems to be apparent is that he was praying towards Bayt al-Maqdis, as that was the original Qibla, with the Kaaba in between. A record of this change, when the Qibla was changed, is reported in both Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Is narrated by Ibn Umar. He said, while some people were offering Fajr prayer at Masjid Quba, someone came to them and said that some Quranic verses had been revealed to the Prophet ﷺ at night, and he was ordered to face the Kaaba in Mecca. So you too have been ordered to turn your faces towards it. And their faces were then towards Sham, which is Jerusalem, right, to Bayt al-Maqdis. And so they turned towards the new Qibla of Mecca. This happened while they were in prayer. And because of this order, Imam al-Buhuti says, فَلَا تَسِّحُ بِدُونِهِ إِلَّا لِعَاجِزٍ. It is therefore not valid without facing it except for someone incapable. Meaning prayer is not valid without facing the Qibla except for someone incapable of facing it, such as someone bound, tied, facing a different direction, or during a battle, while they're in the heat of battle and combat, and the enemy is having them face in a different direction. They cannot turn their back towards the enemy, and they would still pray facing the wrong direction. Or due to illness, in which movement is not possible. Or when someone is not available to help move you while you are ill. If someone is available to help move you, then they can move you if possible. And otherwise, this condition is foregone. He says, وَمُسَافِرٍ مُتَنَفِّلٍ وَيَفْتَتِحُ الصَّلَاةَ إِلَيْهَا إِن لَّمْ يَشُقْ وَيَرْكَعُ وَيَسْجُدُ أَيْضًا إِلَيْهَا مَاشٍ. Or a traveler on a permissible journey. This is important. There's a couple of things that go underneath this traveler business here. On a permissible journey, because prayer in this fashion, meaning prayer facing a different direction, is a concession. It's a rukhsa. And so the journey has to be a permissible journey, has to be mubah. Because if it's a journey which is disliked or a journey which is sinful, then such rukhas, these concessions, are not available to you. Much like someone that traveled for the sake of breaking the fast on Ramadan. It's an impermissible journey, and so it's not permissible to break the fast, or any other impermissible reason, like to shorten the prayer, etc. Also, the traveling is done in a specific direction, okay? Meaning there is a destination. You're not just traveling around. Because the direction of the traveler serves as the Qibla. So he says the direction of travel serves as the Qibla, and without a specified direction, there's no Qibla. And with this understanding is that when you are traveling, and there are some details to this, but in general, if as a traveler you're already not facing the Kaaba, you're facing your Qibla, which is your direction of travel, you intentionally divert course and change directions, now not going towards your direction of travel, or the animal diverts and you're unable to control the animal and it happens to go on for some time, then you've lost your Qibla. You basically turned away from the Qibla, which is your direction of travel. So if you don't have a direction of travel, then it doesn't apply to you, this concession. And this is regardless of the distance of travel, meaning that it can be a short distance, less than a farsakh, or it can be a long distance journey, meaning less than the distance permitted to shorten and combine prayers. So basically like what is considered short travel. And one farsakh is estimated by some as about 5 miles or so in what we would use today. This applies to the nafila only, who without difficulty began the prayer facing the Qibla. Okay, so if it's easy for you to face the Qibla, then you do so. To begin the prayer, meaning the opening takbir, and bows and prostrates in its direction while walking. So if while riding, facing the Qibla with their own body or their mount, meaning whatever they're riding on, the animal or whatever it may be, for the initial takbir to bow or prostrate is difficult, the obligation is foregone. And here he talks about walking, because the walker has been lumped together with the person that rides, because they basically share what the most important thing is, which would be on a journey, they may miss their travel party. They may be left behind while performing the voluntary prayer. And so they're given this concession. So the walker is also lumped together with the rider. But the walker is different in that this obligation is not foregone, meaning to face the direction of the Qibla, the Kaaba, while walking, and also bowing and prostrating in that direction on the ground, because you're already on the ground and it's easy for you to do so. It's not difficult for you to do that. While riding, they're to gesture for the bowing and prostration positions, making the gesture for prostration lower than that of the gesture for bowing. Okay, so again, if they're walking, they're to perform them in the prescribed fashion toward the Qibla. And the general acceptance of this, of not facing the Qibla in voluntary prayers, is based on Allah's words. In the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. And to Allah belongs the east and the west. And so wherever you might turn, there is the wedge of Allah. Surah Al-Baqarah 115. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he commented on this verse and he said that it was revealed specifically for the voluntary prayers. He also noted that the Prophet ﷺ would pray while riding in the direction of his mount, and Ibn Umar would do the same. This is collected by Imam Bukhari. So we take that into the voluntary prayers, and then we couple it with the travel, regardless of distance, short or long, coupled with the rest of the kind of stipulations for doing such. So the wisdom here behind foregoing such a prerequisite is to keep the voluntary prayers from being abandoned or decreased while traveling. And this includes witr, as well as the other prayers like the rawatib, okay, your ratiba prayers, and any other voluntary or recommended prayer. They are all permitted to be done while riding. Some exceptions to this is if you're riding in what is known as the howdah, which is that little room that they put on top of the animal. This was typically ridden by women. Or if you're in a spacious cabin, okay, you're on a train, a ship, or on a standing animal, where your animal is now standing still, it is required to face the Qibla for the entire duration of an obligatory prayer, as well as a voluntary prayer, so long as it's not difficult. So if you're in any of these states, like you're on the plane, you're in the train, you're on a bus where it's possible for you to stand up and change your direction so that you can face the Qibla, you have to. If it's difficult, then the obligation is foregone. So if you're unable to do so, then you do what you can. That means if you can start the prayer with the takbir, facing the Qibla, you do so. If you can't bow and prostrate in that direction, then you have to forego that and do as you can. And this prerequisite, meaning facing the Qibla, is foregone if you are just riding around locally. Like you're not traveling even if a short distance. You're just going from here to the house. You're in your local region, from here to the grocery store. You're not making a journey one farsakh, or you're just traveling around. You're just riding around in your local city, your local town. So you would still have to face the Qibla, right? You may be able to pray while seated or mounted, but the Qibla has to be maintained. The next section, he says, وَمَنْ قَرُبَ مِنَ الْكَعْبَةِ فَفَرْضُهُ إِصَابَةُ عَيْنِهَا وَمَنْ بَعُدَ جِهَتِهَا. Whoever is close enough to the Kaaba that they can see it, or they're close enough to see it, but they're informed with certainty of its close location, must directly face it with their body such that nothing is misaligned. Okay? If you're close enough, you have to face it entirely. Whether you're above or below it is of no consequence. If you remember, we're facing that location and not the actual walls. It's the location that matters and not the wall. So if you're down in a valley, or you're down in a hole, or you're down in a basement, or you're up on top of a mountain, you still have to face that place exactly. Whoever's far away from the Kaaba must face its direction. Okay, the direction, slightly facing its right or the left, like a little bit of what they call an inhiraf. Inhiraf, you see, it means to deviate slightly, either right or left, is also of no consequence, unless you're in the Prophet's masjid, alayhi salatu wasalam, because the Qibla was established there based on certainty. When you're in the Prophet's masjid, you have to be facing the Qibla as was established by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other areas or masajid, however, a slight deviation is acceptable. This is based on hadith which the Prophet ﷺ said, what is between the east and the west is the Qibla. Okay, this is found in Sunan Ibn Majah and at-Tirmidhi. And the consensus has also deemed the prayer of two who are set far apart, facing the same direction, as valid. This is similar to a very long row. The very long row facing the same direction, without taking into consideration any curvature that is the result of the changing angle of the Qibla. As you know, when you move in direction, the angle will change. And so if you have a very long row and they're all facing the same way, that slight deviation is of no consequence, and the prayer is valid for everyone. The next line, he says, وَيَعْمَلُ بِخَبَرٍ عَنْ يَقِينٍ وَمِحْرَابٍ إِسْلَامِيٍّ. Information from someone who is of age, trustworthy, both publicly and privately known for piety. These are some conditions underneath that. Whoever provides you with information. And the information is regarding the direction of the Qibla. And they would say things like, well, the sun rises here, or the sun sets there, and the direction of the Qibla is in relation to that. Or, here is where such and such star is located, and the direction of the Qibla is relative to that in such and such manner. That's the type of it. Or they would just tell you the direction of the Qibla is this way. And this is based on certainty, the person that delivers that type of information is mukallaf, number one, they're of age, they're trustworthy, and they're both publicly and privately known for their piety. Basically, they're like, mutadayyin. They're religious people. They're not questionable. And this is man or woman, freedman, or someone in bondage. If that information is provided, it should be acted upon. And this is acted upon by whoever does not know the direction of the Qibla. They also can use the Islamic mihrabs. As we know, the mihrab is the little prayer niche. These mihrabs that have been established and agreed upon throughout the ages. Okay, so it's something that is recognized as a Muslim mihrab, not one that was built by someone of another faith, whether it was for their religious purposes or to confuse Muslims as to the direction of their prayer. It has to be the mihrabs that have been established and agreed upon throughout the ages. وَيَسْتَدِلُّ عَلَيْهَا فِي السَّفَرِ بِالْقُطْبِ وَغَيْرِهِ. And while traveling, Polaris or other means, such as the sun and the moon and their various stations, manazil al-qamar, etc., should be used by anyone who does not know the direction of the Qibla to determine its direction. Polaris is commonly known as the North Star. The North Star, of course, is used in navigation because it's relatively stable in the night sky. Position doesn't move, but very slightly. It was noted by our scholars that Polaris should be to the back of one praying in Sham, basically behind them, so they're facing south, and then over the left shoulder of one praying in Egypt. So you can see that they were well versed in astronomy, because, of course, these are the indicators of both astronomy, the study of the celestial bodies, whether it's the moon or the stars, even the sun. These are the indicators of both prayer direction and time, and it's considered recommended to learn those things. And if the time of prayer enters, then it's an obligation to learn them, to know them, so that you could determine the time or the direction of prayer. Of course, there are other methods and means by which we can rely upon, as we've come to understand. And then in the event that there's no time to learn these things, then you have to blind follow as your only resort. Basically, you would just follow somebody else and take what they say. And on that note, the next section is what happens when you're trying to figure out the direction of the Qibla. What do you do? So Imam al-Buhuti says, وَلَا يَتْبَعُ مُجْتَهِدٌ مُجْتَهِدًا خَالَفَ وَلَا يَقْتَدِي بِهِ. A mujtahid, and we understand mujtahid is one who exerts some effort based on knowledge and know-how to arrive at a conclusion, is not to follow another mujtahid who opposes them, because the ijtihad yufid al-dhann, right? You can arrive at some type of or some level of assumption. It's not based on certainty. And because you're both making ijtihad, you're both capable of making that ijtihad, meaning you have the tools to do so, then one's certainty is not greater than the other's. And because you can arrive at that level, or one's, I should say, assumption is not greater than the other's assumption, and you can arrive at your own assumption because you have the tools, you're not allowed to blindly follow them. You have to exercise that effort on your own. And this is even if they are more knowledgeable. They're not to adopt their view because both believe the other to be wrong. Right? So you have said the Qibla is this direction, the other person said no, it's this direction. So now for you to follow a person you believe to be wrong, you're no longer at a level of strong assumption. You're now basically following what is doubtful to you, or lesser than that, and you can't do that. وَيَتْبَعُ مُقَلِّدٌ الْأَوْثَقَ عِنْدَهُ. The muqallid, and this is basically the person that cannot make ijtihad. This is either due to ignorance. Ignorance is based on they don't have the capacity, they don't have the tools, they don't have the know-how, or they lack the capacity. Like they can't see, they're blind. Something is impeding them from being able to perform ijtihad. So the muqallid is to follow the mujtahid who they deem most trustworthy in terms of their knowledge, their truthfulness, and their accuracy. They have to pick, because remember, this one says that direction, the other says the other. Now they have to make a decision who they're going to follow. They're going to take the most trustworthy. And this is because the truth is more likely to be with the one who they trust the most and who is most known for accuracy and astuteness. If they're both equal, meaning I trust them both, they're both equal in their ability, then a choice has to be made. You have to follow one. Okay? Following both is impossible. Someone has to be followed. It's like saying, I follow all the madhabs. But the reality is when they differ, it's just not possible. You have to pick one and you follow that one. And basically here, following both is like following none. One believes he's right, the other believes that one's wrong. So one has to be picked. It says, وَمَنْ صَلَّى بِلَا اجْتِهَادٍ وَلَا تَقْلِيدٍ مَعَ قُدْرَةٍ عَادٍ وَإِلَّا تَحَرَّى وَصَلَّى. Whoever prays without making ijtihad or blind following, a mujtahid, while they're capable of doing so. If they could have made ijtihad, or they could have followed somebody that was a mujtahid, but they didn't do it, there may be nobody to follow. Okay. Even if they ended up being correct, because they would have to repeat the prayer. Even if they were correct, they just happened to get it right because they abandoned this obligation. They didn't make an attempt. It's much like prayer time. We discussed this previously. And if not, وَإِلَّا, he says, وَإِلَّا, meaning if they weren't able, they didn't do that, they were not capable of ijtihad or making taqleed. They couldn't make taqleed because no one was around. They should try to make a determination and then pray. They should try to make some effort and then pray. And in this case, they would not be required to repeat the prayer, even if later they found out otherwise. If someone capable of seeing prayed as a resident and made a mistake, someone capable of seeing, meaning they're not blind, prayed while a resident and made a mistake, or a person who was vision impaired used nothing to guide them, meaning they didn't ask a trustworthy person, or they didn't rely upon a mihrab to the point that maybe they went up and they touched it to feel this is the mihrab and this is the direction. They didn't make any effort. They are to repeat the prayer. Here we're going to conclude with this part. He says, وَيَجْتَهِدُ عَارِفٌ لِكُلِّ صَلَاةٍ وَيَعْمَلُ بِالثَّانِي وَلَا يَقْضِي مَا صَلَّى بِالْأَوَّلِ. Someone who knows the signs of the Qibla is to use their discretion for every prayer. They're to exercise their ijtihad for every prayer, because this prerequisite, this obligation, is recurring in nature. It requires them to renew their ijtihad and act according to the latter determination, even if it was the same as what came before. And even if it occurs during prayer, while you're in prayer. So in the event while you're in prayer, something comes to your attention or is brought to your attention that the Qibla is in a different direction. You're making ijtihad. Now, before you couldn't see a shadow to determine where the sun was. Then all of a sudden you could see a shadow, and now you know the directions. Okay? While in prayer, you make the necessary correction and you continue to pray without having to make up what they prayed according to the first act of ijtihad. And this is because the principle we're using is that ijtihad does not invalidate the previous ijtihad. Meaning that was all lost. No, that wasn't squandered or lost. If someone is informed of their mistake in the direction based on certainty, they must accept it. Someone comes and informs them, and that is based on certainty. We discussed this previously about it's not based on dhann. It's not somebody else making ijtihad. Then they have to accept that information. They have to make the necessary corrections. If a mujtahid is unable to determine the direction, then they pray based on whatever they've been able to do. All right, so essentially you have to exercise all efforts in order to determine which direction to pray in. And there is, of course, a priority that has to be given, understanding the direction based on its signs, the directions, etc., whether it's the sun, the moon, or whether it's a compass, and you understand that. Or in the event that you can't do that, you have to rely on somebody to help you figure out which direction to pray. And in the event that none of that's available, then you just do your best, put some effort into it, and then you pray, because prayer cannot be abandoned and foregone, even without facing the Qibla. And that will wrap it up for today. Jazakallah khair.